broken and bleed.
Here. Stonebarger.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Hanson is absent. Colhane.
Here.
Kays.
Here.
And Mr. Thorson.
Here.
And Johnson is absent. We have a quorum, though.
Okay, there are no minutes, so we will not be approving the minutes. So we'll go on to item number
Let's see. We got 1,
2. We got
Uh,
alternate votes.
Diane will be voting.
So
All
you
right.
get a chance.
All right.
Okay. Item number 2.
Item number 2. This is owner applicant is Tim Boots. Property address is 1432 South Lake Drive. Legal description is lots 9 and 10 of Pactola Beach. Application was submitted requesting to construct a compliant 384 square foot, 16 by 24 foot addition onto an existing non-conforming 720 square foot unattached garage. The existing garage is 15 foot from the rear property line where 20 foot is required. The proposed addition will be 45 feet from the rear west property line where 20 foot is required and 18 foot from the side yard where 9 is required. So the existing proposed addition is all conforming. The R1 zone parcel exceeds the minimum area and width requirements. The existing 720 square foot detached garage is non-conforming structure due to the setback of 59 from the rear where the 20 is required. The proposed 384 square foot addition would be constructed in compliance with all current height and placement regulations. The addition is proposed to be separate from a room from the existing garage. No plumbing fixtures are shown or proposed in the floor plan. The parcel lacks standard boulevard and infrastructure requirements, trees, sidewalk trail. No, the sidewalk trail is there across the road. Curb and gutter, approximately 50 foot of frontage, is paved. The board has the authority to require fulfillment of any and all boulevard infrastructure requirements in conjunction with any structural improvements if authorized or required by the Board of Building official. The existing garage, as shown there, was built under permit in, I believe, 1980 by DeBerg, not the current owner. It was proposed to be built over here, and it had conforming setbacks at the time, and it was built over here, and for whatever reason was never made to be moved or anything else. The owner just wants to add on, again, just to the east side here. The setback is required. All public notices have been met. There was one party that was here to speak against that I know of. That's what I got.
Okay, I have a question for you. A couple meetings ago, we vacated some of the right-of-way on South Lake Drive because it's like an 80-foot wide right-of-way. Is this
Over
part
on
of
the east
that?
side, yep.
Is that part of this area or not?
No, this is on the west side of the lake. That was on the east side of the lake.
Okay, is this still, what's the right-of-way width here?
I would have to take a measurement. Let the record show Mr. Mark Stein has arrived. Here it is. That's 70. I would imagine it's an 80-foot right away if it's showing 78 there.
With that, I'll open the public meeting. If anybody's here to speak for or against the measure, if you please come up and state your name. And we still only have 7, right? So
Diane would still be voting yes.
okay.
And also Ms. Johnson has arrived. Sit down, Pinky.
What do you think, Kenny?
Tell them who you are.
My name is Ken Burns, and I'm a neighbor to the folks that are wanting the garage. And
Lives right here to the north side of him.
my main problem is that this garage, when it was built, is in the wrong spot. No big deal. The ordinance says you cannot just up and build onto an existing building unless you folks okay it. My biggest deal is I've got to be able to get out in the wintertime when it snows by 2 o'clock. I've plowed the lake for 100 years. And last winter, we had quite a bit of snow blew in there. Now all it's gonna do is get worse if we keep building and building and building. And I don't know why the ordinance says they have to have a legitimate reason to add on to this existing building. And that's about it.
Okay, they're adding on a conforming addition to a non-conforming garage.
Right.
And your issue is there's no place for the snow to go, or the snow's gonna go on your land, or what?
The snow is gonna block in, if we have a bad winter, which I feel we're overdue for, it'll fill everything in. My neighbor to the north put up a great big garage. There's a gap between the garage and a fence, so I've got that snow coming in. And now I've got an addition on the house coming out to block the snow. And if they add this 15 feet on, it's gonna be tough out there. Because it takes me about 30 minutes once I get out to go up north of town and get my blade, and then we start at the lake. And that, I don't know why they have an ordinance of a non-conforming building. Why should you still be able to build on it if it's an ordinance?
That's why they come before the planning commission, or the board of
I
adjustment.
realize that.
So that's what we're here today to decide.
Yep,
All right, thank you, sir.
Is there
you betcha.
Is anybody here, anybody else? Is the owner here?
Mr. Woods? State your name, please.
My name is Tim Boots, and we're the current owner-occupiers of the property. And I was just looking to add an attached section to that to turn into a recreational workshop.
Was there a building permit earlier this year on that, so for a garage up closer to the house?
Right, we're adding on to
yeah.
the house.
Right now.
Yep, we're adding on to the, putting an attached garage onto the house, yes.
Do you have any response to the gentleman's concern about the snow?
Yes.
No, I don't know how it's gonna, we just moved in here, so I have no idea in the world how it's gonna blow through there.
You know, I think back in 97, 76, and I told Tim this, people around the lake
Would you
live like
please-
rats in a bad winter.
You wait for the microphone, please. We're recording this, so it makes it easier to.
No, I was telling Tim the other day that 75, 76 was bad, 97 was bad, and we've had some bad ones in between there. And the people around the lake, when it gets like that, are living like rats, or just tunnels going up to the houses and stuff. And I don't want that. I just want to be able to get up in the morning and go to work. And the way it sets right now, that snow is going to blow in, and it's going to blow in bad. And I'm not trying to be a poor neighbor or anything, but they haven't been through one of our wonderful lake winters.
Okay, thank you.
Just a comment, if the building was 20 foot off the driveway like it was supposed to be, he would be able to get the addition without coming to see you guys,
Right.
so.
Anybody else here to speak for or against?
Ken, could you repeat that? If the garage was if the addition was located where?
I just said, right now, the building is 15 foot off of the property line to the west. That's why it's non-conforming, that's why he's here. So if it actually would have been built 20 feet off of the property line. And
5 feet, 5 feet.
5 feet more, and if he come to get the addition and was legally conforming, we would not be here in front of you to do it. It would just be allowed.
Because the side yard setback would be 9 feet, and
Yeah,
we're
it's
looking at
18. It's a
18,
long way
18
away,
feet.
so.
Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion to approve for discussion.
So moved.
A motion by Mr. Kays. Anybody, second? By Mr. Dowley. Any discussion?
Ken, is there anything, Mr. Chair? Do we address the chair before we ask questions, the
No,
protocol?
just go ahead.
Okay, wasn't sure how you guys did that. Kenny, when the building permit was issued in 1980, there was no subsequent inspection by the city to ascertain the location for where it was supposed to be built? No inspections done afterwards?
That's where we had no structure was constructed non-compliant with permit details. It was to be constructed southwest corner. And I don't believe there was any inspection records one way or the other, but that was, who was that at the time? Liebert? Lampert?
Liebert.
Liebert?
Yeah, we couldn't find any inspection records.
This is, 37 years ago already, so.
Follow-up question. The city changed the rules or the ordinance regarding the setback or the right-of-way on the one side of the lake, and why was that done? Could you explain that to me again? You said that somebody had brought up the point, I think, Mr.
On the
Schmidt-
east side of the lake, over by Rylance's in front of the country club, they found an 80-foot area there, and almost every one of those buildings for a stretch of, 15, 20 houses were actually either at the property line or across the property line. So they come in here with the thing and made it, and I can't remember if they got 15 feet, 20 feet. You remember what it was, Brandy?
I think it was an 80-foot right away, and they requested 66.
No, so they probably gained 14 feet, and they give that back to that one side to at least give them closer to be compliant.
In appearance, the garage to the north of Mr. Burns's home, from the picture, looks like it's closer than 15 feet.
And well, it depends on how you access the garage. If you access the garage perpendicular to the road, it's got to have a 20-foot setback. What the intent of that is all for is so that a car can be parked in front of the garage without hanging out into the road right away. In this particular case, there is some distance between the road right away and the edge of the property line. If the garage is coming in parallel to the property line, it's allowed to go whatever the side yard setback is, or 9 feet. So this one is actually 9 foot off the property line for the one north of it. So he's actually in effect closer than he is by probably 9 feet.
For that matter, though, I do think that's something that we should be looking at for this area of the lake as well, where we have a substantially larger right-of-way than what would be required for the area. And that's the way that it appears today.
You said you thought there was an 80-foot right away here also?
Oh, it measures 78. I'm assuming it's probably an 80-foot right away.
So,
Ken, could you pull this out just a little bit? I want to get a better geographical reference where we are at the lake. Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Okay, so you can see Marina Bay over here to the south, so we're just north of there.
Yeah.
And like I said, the other spot we was talking about was clear over by the country club on the east side of the lake.
so is the entire South Lake Drive an 80-foot right away?
I would have to do some
The
research
old
to
one-
give you that answer.
I believe the old one, that used to be South Dakota 139, which
Yeah.
probably was all 80 feet at the time when it was brought in.
So we would look at that at a future meeting, and we would, if we change that, we would probably end up taking a lot of people out of a non-conforming building?
I don't, we haven't researched it yet.
Yeah, turn in the microphone, please.
We haven't researched that, but possibly, at least there would be some made conforming.
It seems like they're all kind of built in a line, and they're all violating the backyard setback.
Yeah, that's something we can look into.
Is there any other discussion? With that, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Roll call?
Stein? No. Ford?
Yes.
Dolly?
No?
Stonebarger?
Yes.
Olson?
Just to clarify, are we voting on the appeal?
We're voting on granting this variance.
The yes would be, yes would be
Yes,
Yes,
would
to
be.
allow
the
the
variance.
construction of
Right.
that, no. No.
Hayes?
No.
That's it?
Motion fails.
Mr. Chair,
Yes?
I would like to make a comment regarding this, though. I think this is indicative to some of the issues that we have around Lake Compesca. regarding proximity of existing structures to the lake. This situation is a little bit different because a permit was issued, and obviously something, and that's basically the reason for my finding, is that the permit was originally issued and was not constructed according to standard. I think it's a different situation than something that was there, the ordinance was changed, and that made it automatically non-conforming. It was the action by the previous owner that made the structure non-conforming, and those are the basis for my decision.
Duly noted.
Don't need listed.
Item number 3.
All right, this is the staff appeal for permit number 17552. Owner applicant is Dakota Land Federal Credit Union. Property address is 1101 9th Avenue Southeast. Legal descriptions lots 18 through 24 in the south 50 feet of lots 15 through 17 in block 6 Gisley's addition. And street lot 3 of Stencil Motor Street lots less H2. Application was submitted requesting to construct a non-conforming 2-story, 7,445 square foot commercial building with a 625 square foot drive-through canopy and approximately 27,568 square feet. Parcels located in the C3 Highway Commercial District. Said structure is proposed to be constructed 8 foot from the side north property line where 20 foot setback is required, 15 foot from the front and west property line where 40 foot setback is required, and lacking parking and lot requirements. This is a redevelopment project. The existing structure is to be raised, and the proposed commercial building is to be used for the financial institution, which is permitted use in the C3 Highway Commercial District and per 21-280207. This has already came before the board once on 1/19/17, building permit number 17165. This came before the board. This entire area is in the floodway, and for that building to go out and the new building to go in, there was a considerable amount of work that had to be done with the floodplain at the time. The previous appeal, when it came before us in 117, was granted. The building, that was in January, they done some more work on the building, and the building became a 2-story structure versus a 1-story structure. But the physical setting on the ground changed from 69 1/2 inches to 70 inches, so it gained 11 1/2 feet in one direction, and from 71 to 72 in the other direction, so it gained a foot in the other direction. That's the reason it's back before the board, is because the actual physical footprint on the ground changed 1 foot in both directions. The property is in the floodway. See the attached survey of the area received from the floodplain administration. The other issues is, again, it's redevelopment. It's taking a bad situation and making it a lot better by reducing that area, which is going to be in the floodway. If application is generally endorsed, the board has the authority to require fulfilling of any and all lacking requirements subject to FEMA regs in conjunction with any structural improvements authorized by building permit. This was public notice. All public notice requirements have been met. We had a contacted from one adjacent neighbor, Orville Tacker, who was in favor of the project.
Ken, I have a question for you. This is on the 4th bullet point. It says, even with FEMA restrictions, there is sufficient buildable area upon which to construct the same square footage.
I wouldn't attest to that.
Yeah, I was.
There's a footprint of the area that came out of the floodplain, and when they changed this, I went through considerable amount with Shane and other people, and I don't believe that the building can be set out of the area that's been approved by FEMA to be built on and follow that requirement.
Okay,
But I
would-
haven't
I
personally
would-
verified that, but when doing the other part and watching where it could come in, I can pretty clearly substantial that would not be the case.
Okay, I was curious about that.
And both the setbacks have been reduced from what the existing building was. I mean, made greater distance away from the property.
They're farther away from the alley and they're farther away from the street.
I believe, from the alley for sure, and the street, I believe, yes. We will get landscaping and stuff along the west property line that was not there before. If granted, we, again, reserve the right to allow us to add fencing, trees, and anything else that's in the floodway, that it would be allowed as FEMA would allow that, to make sure it's, again, as a floodway, there's a lot of restriction stuff, so when you're gonna need to vent all those things through, we ask that you give the board, Shane, myself, and whoever, the permission to make sure it's gonna meet the FEMA requirements, not just a general, gotta have them.
Okay,
That'd be curbs, fences, trees.
all right.
Where's the access going to be on? Is there an access point
212.
on the west side?
Actually, I want to put the overhead on, Pete. So yeah, the west side access is gonna be right here. This whole area is gonna be parking lot, so the existing building probably sits about 8-10 feet off that corner. Now we're gonna come clear back to here. It's gonna open up that entire area there. And
What's
the other access is gonna be over here, which is gonna be allowed. They had to have approved from the DOT to maintain it as it was.
What's the
And then-
what's the distance back from the stoplight to that alley? Is there be enough room for stacking?
We got, from there to the driveway?
Yeah.
It's 68 feet over the whole parking lot, so I'm assuming half of that's gonna be about 34 to 35.
So we could. I'm just wondering from stacking standpoint with the
Okay.
intersection.
As it's been presented to city staff, the driveways off of Highway 212 and off of 11th Street entering the property are going to be ingress only, and focus the traffic pattern to the north, and the alley will be the outlet for the traffic to exit the facility.
Oh, thank you.
Ken, if I understand correctly, the building size changed and the building location changed slightly on this property.
Well, the location only changed because the building grew 1 foot in both directions. The original setbacks are not changed. It went a further to the east by a foot, basically, and a further to the south by a foot, basically. The setbacks that were requested before it was granted have not changed.
I guess we'll open the public hearing. If anybody's here to speak for or against the motion, would they please come up and state their name?
Yeah.
Come on up, Mike, and state your name, please.
I'm Dean Schultz. I run the AX Welding Supply Store right to the east of there. We've been working with MAC and had things surveyed and talked to City Hall here. We wanted to build in our empty lot in the back, and MAC came back, petitioned FEMA to let us raise it or do whatever, and they came back with a big negative. So I guess I don't understand how you can go in one building and be in the floodway and rebuild and raise it, and we couldn't raise it or do nothing with our back lot, because we were going to build a new one in the back and scrap our front one. And every time we presented ourselves, we just got shut down.
Well, the area that you want to build in the back has no existing structure, so.
Correct.
I'm gonna turn this floodplain back.
You are 100% right.
And thereby you would be increasing the actual area within the floodplain that is gonna be disturbed by the water flow. This current building here is gonna probably be reduced by 50% or possibly more for what the existing obstruction is in the floodway, and they're greatly reducing it down. The actual land that it sits on is actually out of the floodway. That's the land by elevation that they showed brought up. And that's the biggest problem, is why the FEMA told you no and told them yes.
That's 100% correct. You know, they've got the same amount on their northwest corner out of floodway as we got on our southeast corner. There's about 10 feet in there on each one of our properties that is out, but the rest of it is 100% in.
But they're proving to FEMA that they're making the situation better, not worse.
They never gave us an opportunity to prove it.
Well, that'd have been something you had to do with FEMA, not with anybody else.
Okay, that's just my opinion, and you put them using all the traffic through the alley. Is that alley gonna get paved or concreted, or, I mean?
Their intention is to improve the alley with pavement, at least as far as back as their facility goes.
But if everybody goes east of that facility onto the gravel, because there's actually showing in our back lot a street through there. There is not a street through that, because that's just our basic driveway. I don't know if that's gonna show it or not.
Well, you can see where you guys.
Yeah, that's our driveway. You know, that is not a street.
No, it's just going across your lot.
So if they're thinking they're gonna use that,
Well, we can require signage that says left turn only.
Private drive or?
Yep.
I mean, we don't have an objection to the building. Our biggest objection, you know, how they got it done and we did.
Right. Right. When you came to city staff, we were giving you only a recommendation as to what we believe the FEMA's going to give you answers. Now, these folks went to FEMA with an engineering design team and effectively went through all of FEMA's regulations, hoops, and parameters. And what they were able to prove was that the net improvement to the building site will reduce the amount of restrictions to the floodway. When you had conversations with us as city staff, you were headed the other direction. You wanted to put up more building and more restrictions within the floodway.
We were
So-
gonna take the initial front one out, though.
Correct. Now, if you could tie your two lots together and effectively perfect all of the FEMA regulations and hoops and whatnots, they may approve you for something like that. We were just giving advice that we didn't think that they would accept what you were proposing.
And they
You-
did, because Mac
Right.
surveyed it and went to them.
Okay,
and
so-
they flat told us no.
Right, right. So all I can tell you is that they went to the federal agency and did things in a proper order to gain approval to take a small portion of this lot out of the floodway and allow them to build a building on it.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm just putting my, thank you.
No, I'm glad for the conversation. I really am. It's a good point.
Anyone else here to speak for or against? Come on in.
How you doing?
I'm Dan Cumby, and I'm the president of Dakota Land Federal Credit Union. And essentially, we would be, our plan is to build a brand new office here. We're looking at approximately a $1.3 million investment into the facility, and we want to do it right. And so we do have the LOMA, and that's what you get from FEMA. I don't know if they have that camera.
Yeah, we have it.
But this LOMA is similar to the concrete foundation that the building sits on, and the concrete that's outside the building, that's at a fixed height. And so they take the elevation of that, and that's what with this LOMA, we actually are out of the floodplain based on the elevation of that concrete. And so that area is allowable to build. The other area, this area over here, that is not allowed. You can't put a tree, you can't put a fence, you can't fill in this concrete approach with a curb unless you get permission from FEMA. They're very tough on that, and they don't want the water to rise further if there's a flood, and it's very understandable. But all this concrete was fixed, and so we're actually going to take the footprint of that existing building, and will be considerably less with this new building.
That crosshatch area is existing concrete that's already there?
No, this is the area that it was taken out of by FEMA, though.
It's either concrete or existing building.
So
Most of
you can
it's
build
actually
anywhere in
concrete.
that area and be in compliance with FEMA?
Yes.
So could you bring your building farther south?
Not with a drive up. We would like to, but, right now the current facility is approximately 4 feet off the alley. We'll go to 8 feet off the alley. And, we need a drive up. That's what financial institutions, it's what people want. They want a drive-through, and with the drive-through, we will be bordering the very edge, or we'll be within a foot or so, but we're not going to have 10 feet or anything. You know, it's close, and we have to stay within that. We cannot go across that line, or FEMA will have a problem. And so that's really the only way you can get that facility in there. You know, because FEMA, their setback is harder and more enforced than the cities. And so if we weren't allowed the setback, then the only thing you could really put in there is a building shaped the size of, or that would resemble a mobile home. You know, it'd have to be long and skinny. And, you know, and this building's going to be very nice. I mean, how this whole mix-up happened is we were originally coming to the board in January to make sure that we could build what we're thinking before we purchased the land. And then once we got the variance, we did purchase the land. Well, then we had our architect, which does a lot better job of designing buildings than we do, and then went over about a foot both directions and made it look a lot nicer. You know, our plan was basic.
So in effect, you've already gotten one variance, and what you're asking for is a variance that gives you one more foot to the east and to the south.
Yeah.
And just, this is somewhat of a new board here. I just want to let the other board members know they can feel free to ask questions at any time. They don't have to wait for me to stop talking.
To the board or to you, sir, what was the condition or what was the reason for the prior variance grant? I apologize, this is my first day here.
It was the same exact setbacks, 15 feet from 11th Street and 8 feet from the alley. We didn't increase or change that at all. In fact, that variance still stands, but we would rather build a nicer building, 2-story, that looks a lot nicer than the single story that we really hadn't even designed anything at that time. We were actually just looking for the setbacks. And I think, I don't know if you've seen the picture of what it looks like.
Yeah, I just showed him that.
Okay. Here's another, you know, something like that.
I was on the board when the first variance was applied for and granted, and I'm very confident that had the variance request been what you're asking for today, it would have been granted back then.
Any other questions for Dan?
More of a comment. I am concerned about the entrance-only aspect of the west. People use the path of least resistance, and on one hand, I think this is much better for the corner. It's going to open up that intersection a lot better. It should be a safer intersection. People coming from the north, if they don't have the opportunity to turn east, they'll go to the highway, get on, and then you got to make a left-hand turn across 2 lanes of traffic. So I think from that aspect, it's probably better to have that as an enter and only. It's just the question always comes back is what do we do, or how is it policed in the event that it becomes a problem with stacking and people trying to use it as an exit? And I just don't know what the city's policy is being a newbie.
Well, we can, if that becomes a issue, we probably would have to have the approval of the DOT, actually, because it's their highway that they're accessing. But what I would think the solution would be that they would modify the entrance to act like the entrance on the north end of the Walgreens property, where it's makes it difficult to exit in a certain direction, and that's certainly always going to be an option. I do know that the bank intends to sign it, no exit, that kind of thing. We've had that discussion and at least got that. And as you come from the east, the way the cars are going to be parked in that, I'll call it south parking area, it's not gonna be very inviting to try to line up to exit out onto the highway. So hopefully those physical, things when it's built will, help guide people away from that. And really, signage would be the first wave of direction in this case.
And the landscaping as proposed meets the city's landscape regulations.
To the degree of which it doesn't reflect with FEMA.
Right. In other words, we can't allow them to build shrubs, trees, certain things in that floodway that further restrict the water, so they have to have some limitations.
So more than likely, you're not gonna see these, but you'll see these.
That was one of the reasons we wanted this lot, is because of the light and the safety of entering off the busy street and exiting out onto the slow street. And we want all of our cars to exit at the slowest point of that whole intersection at the alley entrance onto 11th Street. I doubt that many will ever go the other way unless they live right back there. And there might be 1 out of 100 that might go that direction. But we do plan on paving that whole alley that joins our property. And we also do own that house that's right across the street, or right across the alley. And we're projecting that for future parking if needed. So
I had a question on that property specifically, because on the site plan, it calls out a dumpster location that looks like it's on the residential property.
yeah, and that's our property. So we haven't determined if we're gonna utilize that this year or next, but it's in the near-term plan. So
Any other questions? With that, I'll close
Is
the.
there, I do have
go ahead.
one additional question on screening with the residential area there. Is there any proposed screening? You own the one lot, but it looks like there's another residential.
Again, the screening is not gonna be possibly allowed. If it is, we'll do
Because
it
of
to
FEMA.
whatever degree we can with FEMA.
Okay.
But fences and trees and curbs and stuff are pretty much out.
Yep.
And they're again trying to approve this, make it a little better, but please realize that there's already a standing variance. Worst case scenario is they gotta go back and shrink the building down one for both directions, and it's good to go. So,
Any other questions? That'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion to approve with what were your criteria that the
just meeting
infrastructure?
the FEMA regulations with regard to fencing, screening, landscaping, blah,
and
et cetera.
Okay.
I make the motion with the following amendment, that the business also be responsible for any appropriate signage in the event traffic exits the property and moves north across that one individual's property. The fencing, the signage would only be required in the event that it becomes an issue for the adjoining property owner.
A second.
You have a motion by Todd and a second with Mr. Dowley. All in favor? Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved.
I just,
Any old business?
no, yeah, yes, maybe, I don't know. I just have a comment. This is with regards to the boathouse. Okay, I've met with both parties and they have given me a landscape plan and I've gotten comments from both sides. And the board directed me to make sure that we try to satisfy as much as we can. We've tried to do that, but I have accepted the landscape plan as proposed to me by Mr. and Mrs. Christensen. So it's no comment. It's just an FYI
Okay.
thing from you. No more
Thanks
than
for the
that.
update.
So just letting you know the update. Otherwise, that's it for me.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mr. Dowley and seconded by Mr. Stein and seconded by Mr. Dowley. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. So, now Rhonda, this would be the time if you
So, John, I think we'll have you start the meeting, and then I'll add that into the agenda to vote for the chairman.
Don't forget to do a roll call.
Okay. Should I just... Okay, so for roll call, Stein? Here. Ford? Oh, Dolly?
Here.
Stoneberger?
Here.
Olson? Here. Hanson is absent. Culling?
Here.
And Case?
Here.
Okay, so with the new board, then we'll take the time right now to elect a chairman. Joe will pass out slips of paper for you guys to vote.
Randy, do we vote on a chairman and then vice chairman, or
then a
how does
vice
that
chair.
work?
Yeah. Pat,
Justin, do you-
Okay, let's back up a second. We need nominations for chair.
nominations and
Then you need to vote on a chair, and then you take nominations on a vice chair and vote on vice chair.
Yep,
Okay.
that'll be the process.
so are there any nominations for chairman?
I nominate John Stoneberger as chairman.
Second that nomination.
Third it.
Any other nominations for chairman?
I make a motion to cease nominations and call for a unanimous ballot for John Stoneberger to be the chairman, president of the Watertown Plan Commission.
All right.
All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? And the train came down the track.
Didn't even hear it coming.
So we need a vice chair. So we will entertain motions for vice chair at this time.
I'll nominate Blake Dolly.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations? Is there anyone calling for the nominations to cease?
Move to cease nominations
So
and call for unanimous ballot.
all in favor on Mr. Dolly being vice chair, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations.
All right, so we didn't need the slips of paper. Thanks for that, Joe.
So at this time, I'd like a motion to approve the agenda of the August 10th Plan Commission meeting. Any motion will do.
I'll motion.
Mr. Stein makes a motion. Mr. Dolly seconds the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next thing on our agenda is number 2, approval of the minutes of the June 22nd, 2017 meeting. I need a motion and a second.
I'll move.
Mr. Dolly makes motion. Mr. Stein seconds the motion. Any discussion of the minutes? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Minutes approved. Number 3, the replat of Lot 1 Prairie Hills Development, second edition.
Okay, so I have the property pulled up here on the big screen. The petitioner, this is the replat of Lot 1 Prairie Hills Development, second edition. The petitioner, Scott Munger, the manager of Midwest Business Condos, LLC, submitted a replat requesting approval to adjust the lot lines of Lot 1 of Prairie Hills Development, second edition, and dedicate right-of-way that can be used as access of future development to the north. Adjacent zoning designation is R1 Single Family Residential District. Lot 1, Block 3, Prairie Hills Development, second edition. Zoning designation is R3 Multifamily Residential District. It is compliant with all of the non-residential height and placement regulations of R3. The replat will create one conforming lot and dedicate 66 feet of public right-of-way. The 100-year floodplain is present on site, requiring FEMA guidelines, and requirements for construction. A floodplain development permit will also be required with the building permit. And the plat has been submitted to Watertown Municipal Utilities for confirmation on sufficient easements, which they confirmed were sufficient. Staff recommends that the Plan Commission approve the replat of Prairie Hills, second edition.
So Brandy, before this, the proposed right-of-way was right where your arrow was.
Here, I can turn on the plats. Oh, it doesn't even show it there. I believe,
Just to the west of the house is where it was gonna go, and then it would have to go around that pond. And now it's more straight shot, straight north?
right, and I don't know if it was ever platted as right
Okay.
of way.
It was more of a easement, H-lot arrangement. It wasn't a dedication of true right-of-way. And it did follow the eastern portion of this lot and bound up to the north. And I believe if you turned on the preliminary planned layer on that GIS, it might show that.
Maybe concept. No, it didn't.
So
Is
the
it
right of
showing it
way,
on yours? Okay, I was gonna say we can switch the screens.
so basically the right of way is to grant access to the Stony Point addition if it ever becomes a reality, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
What the planning commission previously had given on a non-official request, that if you recall, there was another proposal that kind of came forward from Stony Point that did not include any access points or egress onto the Prairie Hills development. And what we did is we gave recommendation to that developer that without an alternate route into the Stony Point development area, we wouldn't consider any of his proposed plats. What this replat of this lot does is it opens the very southerly portion of dedicated right-of-way to facilitate that development if and when it comes forward. So so far this is the best variation of the right-of-way dedication that we've seen that would facilitate access to the Stony Point addition.
Does anyone have questions for the staff? Is there a motion to approve the replat?
Motion to approve.
Mr. Dolly makes motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Olson seconds the motion. Is there any discussion on the replat? All in favor of the replat, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4, plat of Valley View First Edition.
All right, 1 second, I'm gonna get it pulled up here for everyone's reference. Okay, so this plan has slightly changed since we've updated the preliminary plan on the GIS. Currently, there is another outlet onto the adjacent landowner's property, so then they are not landlocked. The zoning of this area has changed. I think that's about all the changes, just minor. So what we have in front of us now is the plat of Valley View First Edition. The petitioner, Jamie Andrews, is the acting agent for J&J Land Sales LLC. The background with Valley View is the petitioner submitted a plat of Valley View First Edition to be recommended for approval by the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission previously approved the preliminary plan of Valley View at the June 22nd meeting after tabling the item at the June 8th, 2017 Plan Commission meeting. Resolution 2017-19, the Valley View preliminary plan, was approved with the condition that all the issues Helms and Associates finds are compliant with the city's ordinances, and post-construction stormwater management best management practices manual is being followed. The area to be platted has been previously annexed and zoned, which was approved by City Council on July 3rd, 2017, and was effective as of the July 28th, 2017 date. Some facts are the zoning designations with this plat include R1, which is single family residential. There will be 64 lots within this first phase of that they are platting. R2, which is single family attached residential district, there will be 3 lots. R3, multifamily residential district, will create 4 lots. The adjacent zoning designations are residential as well, being R1 to the south and east, and then R2 to the east. The plat will create 71 total lots and contains approximately 46 acres, of which 12 are dedicated road right-of-way. There is a wetland present. I'll turn that on here. If it shows. Well, this water area here, oh, I just didn't turn that one on, is a designated wetland, which they will have to work with the Army Corps of Engineers in enhancement and mitigation, and that will come with their SWIP. The 100-year floodplain is not present on site. The plat has been submitted to Watertown Municipal Utilities for confirmation of sufficient easements, which they've confirmed are sufficient. The staff recommends that the Plan Commission approve the plat of Valley View First Edition.
Brandy, where your floodway is there and where the trailer is, that's going to be a dedicated park area?
Yes.
This,
oh, go ahead.
this plat doesn't really show access to that?
Right here will be the access into the area that will be dedicated as park to the city.
All right.
And let's see. I believe on the preliminary plan, it showed where they would have like a parking area for people to utilize the space.
Okay.
I have a question on Block 5, Lot 5, where it's been the R2 area that's been proposed. Where have we talked about proposed access to that large area? Are we looking at dumping traffic straight onto 4th, or are we going to try to push this traffic back up towards 2nd Street along 16th Avenue? What's the intent?
I'm going to pull up the plat because I think that changed from, okay, so we have.
Because on the preliminary plan that you showed up there, it doesn't, I mean, I see where the 4th Street is, but it wasn't shown as a dedicated street on that layer, or am I wrong?
Okay, so here's the plat that's proposed, and there is 4th Street West. So you're wondering if they're going to direct traffic to the north, east, or south?
I mean, we assign access points to all properties, right? Where is staff proposing that access to that large Block 5 go? Because where you place it will have a definite impact on how traffic flows in and out of that.
Correct. Grant Avenue is the primary north-south corridor through this, so that will be our designated minor collector. So access onto Block 5 will primarily be from 16th Avenue from the north or 4th Street from the west, or along the east.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Brandy? Normally on a plat or replat, we do not open up for public comment, but is there Mr. Tesh represented here that would you like to come forward and give a few comments? Please state your name. And
my name's Jeff Banks. I'm with Blue Hader and Banks from Huron. I represent John Tesh. And I had sent a letter last week to the members of the old Plan Commission. Some of you may have that with you. I think some others of you may have been provided with it. But in essence, what we're asking for is a public hearing at a future Plan Commission meeting to discuss Mr. Tesh's concerns regarding drainage, not only in phase 1, but also in the future phases. At the June 22nd meeting, when the preliminary plan was approved, when drainage was discussed, rate of flow was discussed, but volume was not. And I am not aware of the issue of water volume running towards the Big Sioux River having been in any of those plans, and that represents Mr. Tesh's primary concern. And since the June 22nd meeting, we've had the opportunity to have our engineers examine the site and do their calculations as to the effects that the runoff will have from the Valley View development over the Tesh land. We had what I would call a productive meeting this afternoon that was arranged by city staff, and we certainly appreciate that, and the developer also. And we're at the point now where we still need more time to have further discussions with the developer and his engineer on how that increased runoff is going to be addressed so that it doesn't have the negative impacts on the Tesh land that we think it will if it's not properly addressed. Like I said, we had a productive discussion. We agreed to either later this week or next week try to arrange a time when we can talk about solutions. But again, we're requesting more time and a public hearing at a future meeting so that we can present either those solutions or what remaining concerns there are. Thank you.
thank you for your comments. Little history for the people that weren't here before. Mr. Tesh's land is immediately west of that. This addition is built on a hill, and Mr. Tesh is worried about the runoff going down onto his pasture land. There are several retention ponds on this addition that have been certified to hold the water and release it at a rate of less than what is released onto his land now, but the volume may be more, so it may release for a longer period of time. At the last meeting, we approved the preliminary plan, and as this plotting process goes forward, there will be 2 or 3 other plotting processes coming forward.
There's 5 phases in this
5
development.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I believe at the last Plan Commission meeting where the preliminary plan was approved, it was approved with conditions, was that correct?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and the condition was specifically, and I want to make sure the wording is correct, so Shane, you may want to chime in.
I thought you were going to continue, and then I was going to chime in. The conditions, as I understand them, was that the hydraulic analysis and subsequent design elements were adequately addressed as far as size, confirming that the volume rate of water that we would release from the site comports to our ordinances and related issues to that. And just for clarity, our ordinances address the release rate to match the historical pre-development rate. We do not address the overall volume of water that's released from a subdivision, because inherently to any development of any size, due to the roof surface, driveway surface, and us ultimate roads that are constructed, will result in more runoff from the surface of the land just by virtue of it being paved hard surfaces versus grassy, softer landscape. However, our ordinances are set up to accommodate that parameter. In other words, we don't restrict the increased volume creation due to development. What we do comport to is that we manage the water that's subsequently developed off of here responsibly. So what does that mean? That means, again, that we release the water at the pre-development rates onto adjacent properties. It means that we've adequately designed and sized storage ponds or detention ponds that hold back the water for the appropriate period of time and release it at the prehistoric rates. So that's what has been attempted here by the developer and his design team, and that's what our ordinances allow for.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask another question. Thank you, sir. And this question would be directed to Mr. Banks. Obviously, it's unfair for me to ask you if your conception of what our ordinances read comports with what Mr. Waterman just related. But is it your understanding that volume is not explicitly dealt with in our ordinances, the City of Watertown ordinances?
What I would say is I don't believe that the effect of what both parties agree is a significant increase in water and could be more than 2 times the amount of water now. When you take probably over 50% of a lot and turn it into driveways and so on, has properly been presented and discussed and has been a part of any vote. And we just want that opportunity.
So, if I could ask a follow-up, what precisely would be provided in terms of information, if you could speculate, at a subsequent public meeting that hasn't been provided already?
Well, first of all, the only information that has been presented has been from the developer and his engineer and the city engineer, as I understand it. So what information would be available at a subsequent meeting would be any agreement that may be reached between the developer and Mr. Tesh as to how to responsibly address the increase in runoff. And you could also have the opportunity to hear the opposing view of the adverse effects that the increase in runoff would have on Mr. Tesh's land. And I believe it's proper for any commission to consider the opposing view if the parties aren't able to come to an agreement, which I'm hopeful that we are.
To follow up, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Banks, I believe that South Dakota Codified Law 11-3-6 applies in this situation where we are dealing with a question of really 4 criteria being met. Whether the plat as presented here conforms to a system of streets on existing surrounding plats, whether all subdivision regulations have been complied with, whether all taxes and special assessments for the land have been paid in full, and whether the plat and its survey have been drafted in accordance with the law. And so I guess I would ask you, just get down to the point, which of these 4 criteria haven't been met?
Well, I think it's premature in the sense that if there is a change in the drainage plan, there might have to be a replat. So why don't we wait to the point where the developer, after talking with Mr. Tesh, can talk about solutions to the drainage and say, this is the plat that I want. Maybe they need bigger retention ponds and need to adjust the size of some of those western lots.
One final follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tesh, it's fair to say, had the opportunity to present what he felt would be the implications of approving the plat to his land in terms of drainage at a prior hearing. Is that correct?
I would say no. He had the opportunity to address the commission, but did not have the opportunity to address the adverse effects from a scientific standpoint, because at that point, the engineering, there wasn't time to get it done.
Okay, so
he could only speculate based on his knowledge.
When we had notice of the initial meeting, Mr. Tesh was here with his lawyer, and at that time he requested additional time to do an engineering study. Ace Engineering said that these holding ponds would be adequate to collect the runoff. City engineer agreed with that. City engineer hired Banner Associates, and they agreed that it was adequate. We tabled the motion. Mr. Tesh came back 2 weeks later and basically did not have a lot else to add, and he asked for more time, and we at that time asked what would more time give us, and he didn't really have a good response. So at that time we approved the preliminary plan, and at this point in time the Planning Commission has complied with all the ordinances of the city in this plan, and delaying the project further, I cannot see the relevance of that. If you want to bring an engineering study back that will actually have some substance in it,
So in what form would you like that report?
If you want to bring a report, give it to the city engineer, and you people can go back and forth and decide what is acceptable. We have criteria that we have to meet our engineering standards, and if they don't meet the engineering standards, then they can be adjusted.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
question to the city attorney. If the city has adopted the preliminary plan, isn't the platting process or approval process more of a, maybe it's not a given, but it's something that as long as it comports with the preliminary plan, it should all be a perfunctory process?
That's, I would say, Commissioner, that is essentially correct. I think the way that the South Dakota Supreme Court has viewed it is there is some small amount of discretion to ascertain whether those four criteria that I just listed off are met. So basically, the Commission's role is to look to see, okay, are those four criteria met? Once those four criteria are met, it is a ministerial duty, which is fancy legal speak for you pass it. It's shall in statute. So that's insofar as the recommendation here is akin to the City Council's actions in approving the plat. That's the analysis.
Follow-up question: if the Plan Commission today makes a recommendation to the City Council for approval or denial, Mr. Tesh would have another opportunity to address the City Council at that meeting?
That is correct, Councilman.
Based on
Commissioner.
that, I would make a recommendation to pass the plat as presented.
Motion by Todd to approve. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Stein. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of approving the plat, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Plat is approved.
I do want to have a follow-up comment, and this is just a hopeful comment, that the meeting that we had earlier today, both parties did or appear to at least entertain the idea of resolving this on their own, and I would support that effort is continued after this meeting. So I'm hoping that we'll see this in 2 weeks, roughly, at the earliest, at the City Council. Let's do the effort to have this resolved privately before we have the next hearing if possible, okay? That's just a request on behalf of both parties from my engineering staff, okay?
Okay, Brandy, number 5, resolution recommending approval of ordinance number 1733, amending the sign code.
And actually, I'll turn it over to Justin.
Not necessarily. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brandy. It appears we're getting close to the end of a fairly long journey. And this is necessarily a long journey because of the importance of this subject matter to our community. And it was, I think, something that importance was acknowledged by those that participated in the process, whether it was members of the public, whether it was staff, whether it was elected officials, appointed officials. Each played a role in helping us get to this point where we have before you proposals to Chapter 21.80, which is our sign code, the City of Watertown, as well as attending provisions in Chapter 21.90, which provide the definitions of certain terms in Title 21, including the sign code chapter. I provided a memo that kind of gives a good summary, I hope, of the actions taken by the group, kind of points that motivated a good amount of the substance. And so that kind of gives you an idea of where we started, from concerns about portable sign regulation, concerns about off-premise signs, large off-premise signs, and the U.S. Supreme Court constitutional landscape regarding how signs are regulated as instruments of the First Amendment, instruments of speech. We've since gone through, I believe, 5 or 6 public meetings and probably as many internal meetings to try to come up with a product here that we feel is getting close. And it may not be all the way there, which is why obviously we bring it here before the Plan Commission as a body that's charged with assisting us with fine-tuning these provisions before they go to the City Council. So without further ado, you see I've tracked changes throughout this document here, looking at the ordinance proper. And I'll just quickly go through and cover some of the changes here. And obviously you have the headings on the first page, the sections that have been changed. The second page here, there is the addition of a graphical representation of what we have denoted as, quote, feather signs or feather flags within our ordinance. That is a new term that is incorporated into our prohibited signs chapter, or section rather. Moving from this, and that obviously is on the far right there, that icon in the middle of the page. Moving past the third page onto the fourth page, we have an updated graphic at sub 6 of section 21.8004, which purports to change the Clearview triangle, which at one time was, is currently 15 feet and is proposed to be increased to 20 feet. During our discussions, there was talk of moving it to 25 feet, but a compromise was worked out between various interested parties at the public meeting that a 20-foot Clearview triangle would be acceptable, at least to those gathered there. What the Clearview triangle means is dealt with further down in ordinance. This is just a graphical representation, but essentially it prevents signs from being located within the Clearview triangles. And the way that our ordinance proposes to read, if this were to be adopted, would specify that that includes portions of signs in the Clearview triangle, and that has not been specified, is not specified in current ordinance. As for 21.8005, we're talking about the administrative official. These next few sections really are changed to deal with redundancies, to strike what doesn't need to be there. The building official is already denoted as the administrative official for all of Title 21, so denoting him here as such, or her, would not be necessary. The administration section is struck entirely because it too is redundant. In terms of we have a severance provision in our ordinance here under enforcement. That is implicit in statutory construction, so it isn't necessary. In sub 1 there of 21.8006. The enforcement part of it, again, is replicated earlier on in Title 21. Ken's the administrative official, and as building official, and the building official is charged with enforcement authority of Title 21 per 210207, I believe. 21.8007 is not changed except for certain provisions here on the next page. Some clarifying language there at the top, but then also a change in what basically ends a permit for a sign. Specifically, we have in ordinance currently that 180 days after a business activity or identified entity is discontinued, then the sign needs to come down. If it's not, if the business activity is not resumed within 30 days written notice from the city. The change here is meant to reflect our existing non-conforming use provisions, simply that a sign, if it's up for 365 days after the business activity has ceased, will stop being permitted. Now, there could be other provisions that apply, specifically the abandoned provision to basically have that sign removed earlier, but we've also made that abandoned definition more reflective of the fact that, if abandoned means truly that the business isn't in operation and there's nothing on the sign that's accurate, that's the intention, and we'll talk about the abandoned definition further down in the definition section. The removal of signs provision has been updated such that there is additional enforcement authority, summary enforcement authority granted to the building official. This summary enforcement authority would apply to temporary non-portable signs that are unlawful, meaning the small signs that you've seen put up sua sponte, just on a whim, in the right-of-way, can, after this ordinance is adopted, or if it were adopted with this language, would then have the authority as building official to pluck those signs up and bring them back to City Hall. Now, obviously, there is a concern whenever you're talking about people's personal property and due process. That's why, generally speaking, you are not allowed to summarily enforce provisions. You either have to go through a formal process, or you actually go to the court to enforce. In this circumstance, however, there is not the same due process concern because the property itself is not destroyed. It is going to be brought back to City Hall, and Ken will notify the property owner as to the fact that it is now at City Hall and they can come and pick up that piece of property. So the property itself is not destroyed. The citation for that particular type of summary, there is an Ohio Court of Appeals case that pertains to this and allows for this summary abatement. The section next, 21.8008, pertains to the Sign Code Board of Appeals. And after discussions with staff here internally, I
I don't have it, so I have a number of provisions struck here as redundant because essentially the Sign Code Board of Appeals is the Board of Adjustment. And in that capacity, the Board of Adjustment is really acting as the Board of Adjustment. There is little distinction because it's a building official's decision that is being appealed, which goes to the Board of Adjustment per 210202. So I haven't struck on here the entire section, but after doing additional research, I would propose to strike even more of the section than depicted here. In fact, about the only thing that I would suggest be kept is, Brandy, if you could scroll down a little bit more to subpart 5. There is the section about the appellant having to notify adjacent premises up to a certain number of feet. And that would appear to be the one unique provision that would be particular to sign code appeals that doesn't already exist under our Board of Adjustment appeal process in 210202. So I would recommend that all of the rest of this section be struck, except for that reference there to notice.
And the title would just be appeals, or?
That's correct. That's correct. So time frame, the method of taking the appeal, so providing the notice of appeal, that would all stay the same as with Board of Adjustment process or procedure. So 218010, the only change there is to the sign installer's license. Essentially, what's proposed there is an exception to the otherwise broad requirement that a sign installer be utilized for hanging signs. What we're talking about is for a sign that's a wall sign, not illuminated, has a sign area of 32 square feet or less, and that has a flat face. So we're talking a smaller, basic sign does not need a sign installer. Quite frankly, there are probably a number of examples in the community already of people putting up these signs without a sign installer. So the staff, as well as the public, consulting with, the conversation that we had, it appeared to be sort of a common sense consideration there that we just exempt those sorts of signs from permitting. Other types of signs, non-wall signs, you're starting to deal with structural concerns, and those are very specialized and likely would need a sign installer given those concerns. Speaking of structural, we're moving to 218011. There, a lot of that is being struck because much of it would be included by simply stating what's provided in the proposed Section 1, which is just a reference to those building codes and incorporating them for those purposes. 218012 is unchanged except for the sub 5 at the bottom. The effect there is to get rid of the 180-day rule and just simply focus on whether the sign is abandoned. In other words, a sign isn't going to be abandoned if it's still being used to try to sell, rent, lease the property. That is putting the sign to a use. Ergo, it is not abandoned. Ergo, the concerns with abandoned signs that implicate the city's concerns for regulation, meaning, the sign could fall into disrepair, become an aesthetic eyesore. Those aren't there if the sign is being used to still advertise something. It just so happens that it's no longer advertising a business operating from that facility. It is advertising the sale. So that is kind of the rationale for why that change is being made there. 218014, now we're getting into the list of signs, which is some of the really strong substance. Exempt signs, as it shows here immediately below the heading, are signs that are not required to have permits but still must conform to any applicable provisions within the chapter. So we're talking signs that are generally, not worthy of strict scrutiny or relative scrutiny from the city. Changed here are the inclusion of incidental signs. That was put into sub 5 because the existing sub 5 just wasn't apparent that was much of a concern. But, that could very well change in the future. I don't know. Vending machines are that big of a sign vector, if you will. Sub 6, that provision was struck just because we don't know why exactly that was added to begin with. Nobody could cite to anything, so we thought it made sense to strike it. Building markers are listed as exempt. Banners, as defined below, are listed as exempt, which is in keeping with existing ordinance, but we had to throw it in there. We accidentally struck it in another place. Real estate signs are still in there, but the provision was added there under sub 10, sub C, that the real estate signs must be moved within 7 days of the sale of the property advertised by said sign. So there was a complaint that had arisen about real estate signs being allowed to set for an inordinate period of time, and the thought was, well, similar to contractor signs, if the basis for having the sign there is with regard to working on the property or selling the property, and that need no longer exists, then the reason for the sign should and the sign itself shouldn't exist at the property. Temporary political signs, there the changes in sub 12 are meant to underscore that this refers to temporary political signs as distinguished from other forms of political signs that could conceivably exist. So basically we're talking about those signs that folks put up in front of their houses, in boulevards, the small signs. Sub 15 clarifies that temporary signs can be put out, but we're talking nonprofit institutions, not explicitly private institutions, because it appears the intent, if you look at the listing of school, nonprofit, membership organizations, philanthropic institutions, etc., was to make this about nonprofit institutions. However, the listing of public or private institutions as a part of that greater list would appear to allow for any private entity, any business, to put up any form of sign that they want to, so long as it comports with the subparts below, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So because that didn't appear to be the intent, we made sure to clarify that. Sub 16 clarifies sandwich board signs. Now we don't have any specific statement saying, it's not an exempt sign if it gets to be a certain size. So in theory, somebody could have an enormous sandwich sign just setting out on the sidewalk and not be permitted. This would clarify that it needs to be 10 square feet in area or less, less than 10 square feet in area. So finally, a traditional flag not carrying a commercial message, including a single corporate flag or emblem. That's just a collection of provisions that were struck above as not being clarified sufficiently. 218015 deals with prohibited signs. These are just outright illegal, and so these are signs that can't be permitted, can't be placed anywhere in the community. That's signs with flashing lights, blinking lights. This gets to the concerns about certain types of electronic message centers and the concern about distracting electronic message centers, and a number of other jurisdictions have these sorts of regulations, and most sign makers are well aware of.
So, Justin, we're saying
yes.
that the electronic message centers will have lights, but they just
Correct.
Can't flash or blink. They have to be a gradual.
That is correct. And those terms are defined, blinking, flashing, actually in ordinance, so we make sure to be specific so that there's no ambiguity. Sub 4 deals with the concern about, quite frankly, the putting of banners and advertisement on trailers, tractor trailers in the community, setting those out in parking lots ostensibly. The question was, is it daily use? Is it, something that's actually being used, or is it being used as a sign to skirt under the rules? And this change is meant to clarify that the vehicle needs to be actually and actively used in the regular course of business in order for it to not fall under a prohibited sign definition. Sub 5 is clarification, because there is no place where searchlights, streamers, twirling signs, and sandwich board signs are allowed except for in section 218014 sub 16. So that needs to be changed. Sub 6 deals with flags, feather type and traditional, displaying an advertising message except one traditional flag bearing a corporate logo or emblem. The thought there is advertisements should be placed on fixed signs, and the proliferation of feather signs in the community was viewed as a concern both from an aesthetic and a safety standpoint. So sub 8 is just clarified there. We don't care about whether it's advertising or not. If it's obscene or pornographic, it is not protected under the First Amendment and can be prohibited. Sub 13 is what we're talking about in terms of substance, the clear view triangle. So we depicted it up above in the graphic. Here we describe what we are specifically talking about when we say you can't have a sign in there. So that's what that description does there. As for other prohibited, we clarified that pennant signs actually is a stringer of pennants, not a single pennant, because that's actually what the graphic represented above that we've always had in ordinance. For whatever reason, we've defined it as pennant signs down here, and that's incorrect. Flags containing a commercial advertising message, again, getting back to the subpoint provided above. Parasitic signs, that's a new sign concept. It is defined down below. You can sort of flip through your pages to see that definition. And the final prohibition is an important one. There was a concern, a couple concerns articulated about the ability for potential landowners under current ordinance to be able to carve up their property into tiny pieces that wouldn't be able to support any building under our current ordinances, given the setbacks, as was discussed here at the Board of Adjustment meeting. But there is no, I shouldn't say there is no, but you can create a pretty small lot to put a sign on, the way our ordinance reads currently. And in fact, there are examples, there's at least one example of a very small lot in our community that is a postage stamp in every sense of the word that has one sign on it and is used for that purpose. So there was some discussion about making a sign an accessory use to a lot, meaning that you could only put a sign on a lot if there was a structure on that lot. And there was a great deal of concern articulated from corners of the public about how that would impact, certain land that's bare ground leading into the community where signage is already placed and is, has a lot of visibility. So the compromise that was worked out is what's provided here in sub 18. The idea is that we have minimum lot area requirements as well as minimum lot widths in ordinance. And so the sign must be placed upon a lot, not that the lot has a structure. That's not a requirement, but the lot merely needs to meet the minimum lot area and width for that zoning district. And that information is provided. The zoning district minimum area requirements are in 21-1001, I believe, or 21-1002. So this would still grandfather existing signs. That's correct. That wouldn't change. Just like any of our ordinance changes in zoning law, the non-conforming uses are non-conforming uses.
So my question on this one then is, so for those properties that may have been platted or zoned at a time prior to the existing lot size requirements, if they needed to replace their sign and their lot no longer conforms, but you have an existing operation, then I feel that this would adversely affect those lots or those businesses.
I mean, that certainly is a possibility, Commissioner. I mean, there is still the variance process, which does get into kind of looking at the zoning, whether or not it is conceivable that a benefit or a beneficial use or what is the other term that I'm thinking of? Oh, well, the term is, when you're looking at unnecessary hardship, you look at reasonable use or beneficial use. That's the phrase. And so the question would be, I mean, obviously a use is there, the building was there, but the question would be looking at the zoning right now, because it was rezoned, and it was rezoned for a reason, and presumably that use is still usable there. And if it's not, then it's potentially open to variance, I guess is what I'm kind of saying. So, the way our framework of law reads is, if it was zoned that way, it had to have been for a reason. And so these minimum lot requirements, are in keeping with the zoning, the justification for the rezone. So, there always is. Yep. Thank you, sir. The change to 218016 is minor. We struck illumination. The thought there being that, that could be, depending upon how broadly you change that or you construe that, is it a fundamental change in illumination or a slight change? Moreover, do we want to essentially penalize folks for upgrading their signs to some signs that are perhaps more energy efficient? So long as they meet the requirement that they don't flash, they don't engage in, what we've determined to be prohibited sign qualities, that they should be okay under our ordinance. Not much has changed thereafter until we get to a new section 218022 taking over a reserved section. There is defined the specifics around the regulation of electronic message centers, and what we mean by these EMCs is simply an electronic sign that has gradual movements, and that's provided in sub 1, including but not limited to dissolve, fade, scrolling, or traveling. Again, each of those terms, dissolve, fade, etc., those are defined in our ordinance as proposed. Okay. Regulation of portable signs. These provisions were changed to reflect some discussions had with someone within the portable sign industry as well as the general public. There are essentially more regulations placed upon the siting of these particular signs, moving the setback from 10 to 20 feet from any abutting property line, unless the abutting property owner consents to placement there at a closer site. And electric signs are obviously going to need to comport to our EMC regulations. We also add additional regulations that portable signs shall be separated by not less than 200 feet from any other portable sign, sort of in keeping with the off-premise sign regulation that we have, although that's 500 feet as opposed to 200. And the additional sort of punishment of a failure to obtain portable sign permit would result in doubling of the permit fee. Now, there is a notable relaxation as defined in sub 2 here. Portable signs are prohibited from being located, or excuse me, I should back up here. So that is an additional, there's a regulation as well as, a relaxation rather, as well as a regulation, meaning that we no longer prohibit off-premise portable signs. However, portable signs cannot be located within the right-of-way and within 10 feet of a curb. So there needs to be, the signs need to be backed up off the curb. But it is notable that there is that relaxation that now off-premise portable signs would be allowed. Sub 3, under regulation of off-premise signs, we'll move to that real quick. There's a strike there. The old sub 1 is removed because that's been changed in sub 2 of 218023, the section we just dealt with. Sub 3 has been suggested to be eliminated because there was the thought that this is the one, for all intents and purposes, as far as I can see, the one conditional use that we have specific to the sign code. There may be one more down there with regard to off-premise sign around the interstate, allowing that sign to be of a greater height than otherwise allowable. But this is the one or the other big one. And the thought was that if some sign manufacturer, some sign landowner wanting to put a sign up, wanted to put up a double billboard, that sort of sign could be brought up as a variance before the board as opposed to a conditional use. That would make the approval process much more difficult, obviously.
Comment.
Yes.
In reading your memo, it talks about that the reason for this process was to readdress off-premise billboard sign regulations, and I see that there is the one change. But my understanding and recollection at the time over a year ago was the discussion at the city council was dealing with concentration of billboard signs up and down the highways in the city of Watertown, and it doesn't appear that the subcommittee has come forth with any recommendations on how to mitigate or minimize that immediate concern, and why we've had a billboard ban for all practical purposes for the last year or so. So my question is, was there discussion regarding why we aren't coming forth with any billboard recommendations?
Commissioner, that's a fair critique and a great question. There was a great deal of agonizing done on this particular issue in public meetings and in the internal meetings. We took a trolley tour out to various areas denoted as being potential problem areas, given that, the concentration of off-premise signs. What was determined at that time was, in looking at our ordinance, there would be a number of signs in various problem areas that, by virtue of the expansion of Highway 212, would no longer exist under our current ordinance structure. So the thought was that with the expansion, the problems could very well be taken care of. So this may be an issue that time, in fact, corrects. And given that, there wasn't a lot of movement towards making substantial changes. So here, there's one thought that I had that I guess I would ask your feedback on. We have 218026. We're getting here towards the end, finally. This ostensibly provides that there are no signs to be erected in the public right-of-way except these 4 types of signs. Now, obviously, you can see from your experience driving out throughout the community that this is kind of problematic. I mean, in the sense that a lot of the temporary signs that you see out there, political signs during the campaign season, are temporary signs that are located within the right-of-way by being on the boulevard. So the question is there more that needs to be put in here? Or do we essentially not enforce what's provided explicitly in ordinance? So I guess I would leave that to you here just as a thought.
I guess I had written that exact thing down as you were talking earlier, specifically on the temporary political signs, and you do see them in the boulevards. And I guess from my stance, it's not been something that we've enforced in the past as far as the removal of those signs, and because of the temporary nature of them, I wouldn't be opposed as long as we limit the area of the signs. I wouldn't want to see a 4x8 billboard in a public right-of-way, but a small sign in front of somebody's house I don't think is a major concern.
Or a realtor sign.
Do you want the realtor sign there, though?
I mean, you put realtor signs are in the right-of-way all over the place in this city.
Well, I know, but I'm looking for the ability to be able to enforce what's been accepted and not accepted. And this is some of the same questions I was going to bring up, too. I don't have an issue with the political signs because they're temporary for the most part. You get biannually or every 3 or 4 years, and they're going to be there for a regulated period, and this is people's own public property. But I'm not necessarily in favor of the realtor signs staying in there, or the for rent signs, or the or the garage sale signs, or house for sale signs.
They're not allowed in there right now. We're just not enforcing it.
Correct.
Okay, so.
Right, so I'm looking for
maybe it should be put on
recertification
the
that that's what
property
they
and not
want.
in the right of way. That,
I'm not, that's not what I'm saying, I'm just
Oh,
saying, I'm just
that's what
asking.
I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they should be taken off the boulevard, taken off the right of way, and put on the physical property if they want to put up a political sign or whatever. That's my viewpoint.
Agreed.
I think that's our preference as well.
And for that matter, I wouldn't be opposed to that either. I just think if we're gonna allow them, we should either enforce it or we should change the.
So I think at this point that wouldn't result in necessarily any change in text. It's just emboldening administrative and city enforcement authority. So, okay, thank you, commissioners. We'll just go quickly through the remainder here because most of it is clarification except for the definitions. Table 1 is changed to reflect that we have 2 new residential districts, and those provisions there in that table are all the same between the 2 tables, so or between the 2 columns there where those 2 provisions are added. The same is done to this next table too. The language changes in here are meant to clarify that indeed once you go over the first level, which for C3 is 200 feet of frontage, for business park is 500 feet of frontage, that you are allowed 1 additional sign. The way that it reads currently is unclear, giving a range of 500 to 1,000, and then, well, what happens if you have over 1,000 feet of frontage? Do you get no signs, or do you get 5? I mean, so here it's clarified. Large frontages get 1 extra. So moving on to the definitions, clarified the definition of abandoned sign as not including a blank sign that otherwise shows no reasonable indication of a lack of maintenance. What this means is, okay, say we don't have a for sale, for lease, for rent. The concern that the city appears to have in regulating these sorts of abandoned signs is, again, if they're an eyesore or if they might pose a safety risk because they are not maintained. If the sign shows no reasonable indication of a lack of maintenance, then it is not going to be a safety or an aesthetic concern. At least that's the thinking. So that's how this definition is changed. Here, the EMC definition includes the terms that were defined above or used above: dissolve, fade, frame, frame effect, scroll, transition, travel. As I referred to above, with exempt signs, we have these incidental signs. That's a new term, a new category defined as signs that are not intended primarily for that are intended primarily for information, convenience, and safety, not necessarily for advertising. Off-premise signs were added the additional language that would exempt off-premise signs for nonprofit activities, so basically allowing homeowners, business owners to, where the zoning district otherwise permits it, put up signs that advertise nonprofits. Parasitic signs are defined as prohibited signs above, and these are the 3 types of parasitic signs. Real estate signs are then clarified as being signs that are defined as a sign while the property is available for lease, rent, or sale. And that sign is placed on the property for that purpose. And with that, the only other thought here, temporary sign, I do have this denoted for a reason. Question is a temporary sign a portable storage crate? Or is it a permanent sign? That's what I would put to you, because we do have an example of an electronic message center in the community, an electronic sign that has been placed up on a portable storage crate. And our definition of temporary sign is any sign used for varying periods of time which is not temporary or not permanently attached to the ground or other permanent structure. Well, is a storage crate a permanent structure? And the issue is that the way our ordinance currently reads is that kind of sign would need to be put up on a monopole in order for it to be permitted in the city. So either it's a temporary sign lawfully there, or it's a permanent sign that is prohibited.
It's a permanent sign that's prohibited. I mean, if and that's in my opinion, it'd be a permanent sign. It's affixed to a structure, whether that structure be permanent or temporary. It is a structure. It's occupying space.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I wouldn't classify that storage unit as a structure, though. Not by code, anyway, in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's.
Then that
I'm not saying it's portable or anything. I'm just saying it's not a structure. Is all I'm trying to say.
That to be specific, then, because that's a loophole.
So thankfully, we've reached, I guess if there are any other comments on that concept.
Yeah, please comment on that concept. I'm not for or against it either way, but I'm just saying that don't make.
I
would like to see some regulation one way or the other.
Yeah, I understand what you mean by the can as a structure, but it's an indirect way to circumvent what the intent, maybe consciously or unconsciously.
Well, one concern is that it can be moved to just about anywhere in the city in not a long period of time or effort.
So would it be classified as a portable sign?
That's what we're asking you guys.
I would classify it as a portable sign.
And to clarify, portable sign is a subcategory of temporary sign under our ordinance.
But on the portable sign, you have a maximum size of the sign.
Correct.
Now, is that the sign itself, or is that the structure or thing that it's being held to?
Yeah, but we don't include this thing it's being held to as part of the portable sign.
So if I went out and put a semi, and I attached a portable sign to it, and it has wheels, and I can tow the semi around town, it's a portable sign.
Under the current definition, that's what we're hoping for you guys to clarify.
That needs to be fixed.
So let's just say that a portable sign must have a small structure and wheels permanently attached or something.
Take a picture of what we mean and put the picture in the ordinance.
We're still trying to outlive the portable sign ordinance from 2 changes ago.
I was there.
I appreciate your feedback, Commissioner, and we'll be looking at making these modifications. So as it sets right now, there is the thought of modifying the temporary sign definition to specify that there needs to be a small structure and either wheels or some sort of ability to convey readily. And
they changed to the Sign Code Board of Appeals?
Correct. Those appear to be the 2 items. There was one scrivener's error there where it was an extra number that was tossed in, and that will be dealt with as well.
There's one other small item. Jill pointed out that we have within the home occupation standard, we allow, says no exterior advertising other than a small announcement sign not more than 400 square feet in area mounted to the side of the structure shall be allowed. Do we need to re-edify that within the sign code, or is it fine just being a sub part under the home occupation?
Insofar as the home occupation needs to come before the Board of Adjustment as a permanent
conditional use anyway.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. Then
So
it would be addressed at that stage.
So we don't need to re-edify it then in the other part. Fantastic. Just want to verify.
I did have a question, and it may pertain to this as well, but the non-illuminated and the requirement for a sign installer is non-illuminated. Illuminated sign would be a self-illuminated sign. They could have a light shining on it and be a non-illuminated.
Self-illuminated is what I'm understanding it to take it as.
That is my understanding as well. Maybe we need to clarify that.
I was just wondering. I didn't see the definition up there. I was watching for it, but
sure.
I did want to clarify
my
that.
take was that you can shine a spotlight on it because that's.
Point of order. This is also a public hearing. Is that correct for the public?
Correct.
So do we need to open the public hearing?
Correct.
At this time, I'll open the public hearing. Anybody from the audience would like to comment, please come forward, state your name.
My name is Connie Swarthout. Thank you. I think there's two people in the room who know who I am. So just briefly, my grandmother was born here, my mother was born here, my brothers were born here. My great-grandfather was a founding father of the city. I graduated with Diana 50 years ago. Oh, God. Moved back. I've had a lot of experience with Ken, and I worked with the different planning commission back then. I'm coming late to this thing, and maybe it's too late, but I'm coming to you just to explain something that I have felt strongly about since we purchased our house, and then officially moved in 11 and officially moved back here in 14. You briefly ran over the sizes and the heights and the everything, and really I'm cutting out a lot of my notes here because it's late. My concern is Highway 212 and what it looks like when you drive into this town. I love Watertown. I grew up here. I love this town. And I wish Diana Burns was still here, because I commented to her once that when you cross under the freeway and come into town, there's absolutely nothing about 212 that would attract anybody to move to this town. Nothing. You have got signs that are twice as high as other signs. You've got signs all over. The signs, we are going to be having to move, I'm guessing, almost every sign on 212 from 20 to the freeway, or to 19th, maybe. And if you look at the first people on the very west end of 20, or 212, their signs are nice and low. The issue, I lived in a town where they put a sign ordinance in, where they restricted the height by how many. If there was one building on the lot, it could be that high. If there were two buildings, it could be this high. If it was a Walmart or a Target or one of those things, you could get a much taller one because you had a big lot. If you had multiple buildings, stores within one building, you would still have just one sign, and that sign would list each person. You wouldn't have 5 signs because there was 5 different businesses there. Obviously, the business owner screamed and ranted and raved. All I know is whenever I go to that community or any community who's done that, I'm driving down the street looking for something. I'm not going, I can look right there and I can see what I'm looking for. I think I understand that there's an ordinance in effect on height and size, but it's not enforced because the business owners have said, you can't tell me what to do. Every sign, I think, is going to have to be moved when 212 gets expanded. We're losing 17 feet. So that's 8.5 feet, or 8 feet on each side. I've been told that the city is going to help people pay to move their sign. They're going to subsidize them in moving their sign. The state will. That's still my money. That's the way I feel about that stupid thing you're doing on 3rd Avenue there when they close the railroad tracks. But that's not here or there. I think that people, if they move their signs and they're getting subsidies, they should shorten their signs, buy a new sign, do something else, and we should get more consistency. And maybe you have that in the ordinance. I'm sorry.
That's under state law. The state of South Dakota, when they come by on a state highway and expand it, they have to pay to move the sign. Now, this city has got nothing to do with the state law.
That's too bad.
However, I express the same thoughts that you have on our signage. And when we started this sign code meeting back in January, or whenever it was, there was a lot of appetite for getting rid of a lot of signs and making it a lot cleaner. We have to take public input, and we have public input. There are 2 large sign companies in town. So a lot of the public input was, don't restrict us too much. The billboards in this on 212 will have to be moved. The billboards on 212 are not in compliance with our current sign ordinance. It specifies they have to be on a single monopole, not 4 fence posts or 4 whatever. So they're all going to have to change their structures. The double billboards will not be allowed, and that's we're taking baby steps. We're 4 or 6 years ago, they spent 2 years coming up with a sign code. And we're trying to strengthen it. I'd like it, see it stronger than it is, but we have come to the end of a process where we had to compromise, and this is what we are proposing.
My understanding is they aren't really going to do 212 within the city limits until the roundabout is on the bypass.
It'll probably be 2 years from now.
So it's 2 years. So we've got 2 years to maybe work with the owners. I think, if you want more people to live here, so you've got more people to come to your store and buy things, let's make it more attractive. Let's make it when people drive through, they say, you know what? I'm thinking of moving to South Dakota anyway. This looks like a nice town. Maybe I should, look around here. Right now, I'd keep going if I wasn't from here. So that I'm putting in my 2 cents. I'm probably late. I don't see all of the notices in the paper. I'm not quite sure still where to look for them. I did see this one, so I had it ripped out and tacked up to my refrigerator the last 3 weeks to come here. So I appreciate you listening to me. If I didn't like Watertown or love Watertown, I wouldn't be here. And I participated in the shred. The downtown's a whole nother issue. We need a strong downtown if we're going to have a town that's going to grow. I'll just throw that in.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Justin and Ken, maybe under the proposed ordinance, what does a sign look like? I mean, let's say Jimmy's Pizza comes to town. They're going to open a business on 212. They now have to comply with the new ordinances. 212 is all the setbacks have been blown up by the expansion. We're 2 years down the road. What does it look like?
So there would be certain signs, and it just so happens that the non-conforming signs, the ones that violate the density requirements that we currently have, the setback requirements that we currently have, the construction and other requirements that we have, also coincidentally tend to be the ones that are the biggest eyesores. Because they are the longest lived of the signs out there, because that's why they're still able to be there. So the hope is that there will be less signs, and that there will also be the eyesore signs, if you will be taken care of. And I apologize if I offend anybody for characterizing some signage as that, but I won't name names, if you will. So that's the hope. And also, knowing that the folks like Ken have the support of the council and the Plan Commission and Board of Adjustment to kind of go after signs that would appear to violate some of these provisions. I mean, it's why we asked the question tonight about a certain type of sign. And so I think with that 1-2 punch, we will see some substantial change.
During the trolley tour, where you looked at signs, were objectionable or signs that everybody had a tendency to agree where, if we have a chance to get rid of it, we should get rid of it? Were they identified, a list put together to be considered about when 212 is reconstructed?
There were examples given. We were given a breakdown of various pictures of these signs, which ones would be removed. So we had something of an idea, not the full picture, mind you, but yeah, we did take a look at those.
When they expanded 81 North from 3rd Avenue North all the way up to 14th Avenue or farther up, a lot of those signs had to be moved. A majority of those signs, when they were moved, they were upgraded to be more aesthetically pleasing, and it's our hope that happens on 212 also.
Would you say that again? What was the length of 81 that you're talking about?
From 3rd Avenue North all the way to, 18th Avenue? They widened the highway there. They had to move.
Last year's reconstruction.
Yeah, last year's. They had to move a lot of those signs, and a lot of those signs are a lot more aesthetically pleasing than they were initially.
So that would be a good real-life example of relatively compliant signs, or what signs would look like
Yeah, there's a
largely
large,
under this ordinance.
there's a larger concentration of signs on 212 than there was on, 81 North, but we can hope.
I'm just trying to visualize what actually happens if this is presented. If that makes sense. What does this look like? What does our community look like in 2, 3 years, 4 years? And so that if that's a kind of a micro cut or a small portion of what we have in store for us on 212, that would be helpful.
I think we're making gradual progress. We're not taking great leaps and strides, but I would like to see more progress, but we have to compromise with everyone.
One thing I might ask, if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask a question of staff, Ken specifically. Ken, looking at the signs that have come up for permits in the last, say, 4 or 5 years, since the last sign code iteration, I mean, would you say that the sign types, the aesthetics, are, in your mind, improving? Are they being more sturdy, more, I don't know, responsive to public concerns generally, or have we gone the other way?
I'm sorry. No, I think the ordinance has been effective, at least as far as sturdiness and the appeal of what they look like right now. They're definitely improving that way. But it's our general size hasn't changed, or the number and all that stuff. But as far as aesthetically, yeah, they're all looking a lot better than they had in the past. Because in the past it was 4 fence posts and a billboard,
Yep. And that was a key factor in the discussion when we did do the trolley tour. I mean, we looked at what the old sign, you could clearly see what the older generation of signs look like and what the new generation of signs look like. And that was a key thing that I personally took out of that conversation from our ride the people that are associated with signs and putting up new signs really pointed that out. And I think that, you can clearly recognize the signs that were put up in the last 10 years versus the ones that have been up there a lot longer than the last 10 years.
Does the gentleman in the back have a comment? Could you come up to a microphone and...
My name is Mike Sheehan. I'm going to wear 2 hats. I'm going to make it short because I've sat through a lot of this stuff, and I'm on both sides of the fence here. I spent 40 years on West Watertown in a retail business. I understand what this lady's saying, but I want to make sure when we go into all this that you respect the businesses that are on these signs, okay? I am one of the people that own the billboards. There's not as many on 212 that we think about that I thought was there till I drove it, okay? When they widened the road. But if you were in downtown Watertown, or if you're in Highway 81 North, you want to have people acknowledge your business that's there, okay? They're the businesses that are collecting 2% for the city. They're collecting 4 or 5% for the state. We have to look at all that, because when I read the paper, I know in the state right now, we need sales tax. City could use the extra money. If we throw an example of, let's just say we take 3 of these signs down that have 4 signs on them. Who do you pick, these businesses that have been on there for 5 or 10 or 15 years? How do you take a look at them and say, you're not there anymore? You're gone because of the ordinance. Or they have been there, we're not building anymore. I haven't built any of those structures probably in 15 years. And I'm proud to say that I had the foresight 20 years ago to look at that. And I can tell you, I travel a lot. I've been everywhere. And I deal a lot with businesses. I've spent 20 years in Sturgis, where you meet the world. And you talk about Watertown, South Dakota, I do it favorably. I don't think that we should throw these businesses under the bus. 212 is a business district. It's not a residential area. But yet, I respect what she's saying. You want it to look good, okay? I don't have an answer for it, but on the other hand, You know, do you tell Makepeace Jewelry, Pro Hearing, Guest House? Those type of businesses use billboard advertising. If we like it or not, I don't think everybody in this room understands it. I didn't understand it either for a lot of years. That's there. Stuart obviously is coming into the business. You know, there's a lot of future down there. But I think we have to respect those businesses, and that's why I showed up here tonight. Yeah, I might lose a sign or two. That's not going to hurt me. My career is basically done, okay? But I'm here to defend those people, and we come up with some kind of a solution for them, you know? That's all I really got to say. So I hope you take that into consideration, okay? Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Stuart Stein, and I also am a lifelong resident of Watertown. And I think it's important to note that while we've participated in countless meetings here to formulate this sign code, even though we're members of a sign company, we're also members of a community, and we also want the community to look nice. We don't want to see a bunch of clutter. We don't want to see a bunch of sign blight, as the term that was used throughout these meetings. We want it to look good as well, and we feel that, as was mentioned, you can tell some of the signs that have been put up several years ago that are still hanging around. Our hope is that those signs will be eliminated too with the expansion of 212, so that kind of just a process of elimination through the growth. We think that the existing sign code and the new formulated sign code will make signs attractive in the shape and size and the placement of where they're going to be with this new, with the new sign code and with the expansion. We think that you're going to be happy with the end result. I think it's also important to note that you know, as it was mentioned that there's 2 large businesses in town. We've got 120 employees at our particular business that are relying on the livelihood of producing signs. And while there's a balance between making sure that the city looks good, we also need to make sure that we are looking out for the interests of our employees as well, and trying to strike that balance. And the term compromise was used a lot from multiple people tonight, and I would say that that's exactly right. We're happy with where the sign code is at as of now. John, of course, would like to see it a little bit, you know, further tightened up, and perhaps it'll get there someday. But for right now, it's baby steps, and we, from a sign community, feel good about where it's at, and hopefully the others that participated in the numerous meetings feel that same way too. I would just make a note as it relates to, you know, billboards. As it stands to billboards, you know, the comment was made, well, not much is being done to address it. Well, just through the last 5 years, we've shared this information in the sign meetings. We've actually gone down in billboards in terms of our total portfolio within the community. We've actually gone down. The Hobby Lobby expansion is a great example of that. We lost a great structure, and as those other developments west of Hobby Lobby come into play, all those billboards are going to be gone too. And we fully understand that and realize that it's just a matter of time.
Please don't misconstrue my comments that it doesn't seem like not much was being done or things haven't been being reduced. It just looks like there were no changes, substantive changes to the rules regarding off-premise signs and billboards. That was what my observation was.
I think the biggest change, though, is the lot size requirement, that you can't just sell off a piece of property to put up a billboard. Now it has to meet the minimum lot size requirement, which is a big change, because that is a loophole in the sign code as it is today. So with that being said, I guess I would just ask for your consideration. Know that there was a lot of time and effort put into this from many parties, and we feel as though it's a good compromise. You know, it's give and take, and hopefully all of you feel the same way too.
I agree with you. There was a lot of compromise in this process, and it's been a long process. But I think what we have here is a good product that we can all live with for now.
In your travels as a sign company, and as folks are talking about the expansion of 212, are business owners proactively seeking you out? Are you starting to kind of advise and help with that process? Is that something that needs to be facilitated? And of course, I'm talking as a very short timer now with the Chamber of Commerce, but something that those sign owners, it's a major investment for a lot of those business owners, and they're going to have to take that consideration. Is that something that people are starting to contact you about?
A little bit. I don't know that we've received many inquiries on the Highway 212 yet. I don't know if the letters have been sent out to the business owners. They may have. I can speak to Highway 81. Almost every business owner reached out to us in some way, shape, or form, and we were able to help facilitate the process of moving their sign back and either keeping their sign the same, just moving it back out of the right of way, or redoing their sign slightly, but adhering to the new sign code or existing sign code.
I would guess that's going to be half of the challenge, is just getting all of those folks captive enough to understand that this is the vision. And I think if you lay out the vision, these are business people. They want what's best for this community. But we have to be, to Mike's comments, respectful of this is also their livelihood. And so there is a very delicate dance there. And we want to make sure that we're supporting them too.
I guess I just have one comment here. And I know this topic of conversation is primarily on signs, but as I'm looking at this image up on the screen right now, one of the other things that we have to consider is that aesthetically, a lot of 212 is concrete. And without landscaping and greenery and something to make it more beautiful, you're drawn to just the sign specifically. And so, as we think about the greater aesthetics of the area, landscaping is just as important as developing a stronger sign code.
That being said, I think we're here to obtain a resolution or try to get a resolution to pass this on to the city council. So now the changes that you have mentioned were strike all at 21,808 except for section 5?
Except for the second, third, and fourth sentences of section 5.
Okay. And was there anything else that you were proposing for us to change in that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Section 218010, sub 2, sub B, the word illuminated used in the proposed to be added sentence should be self-illuminated. And then a scrivener's revision to 218015, sub 5. That should read, the citation to section 218014 should be sub 16, not sub 216. And then the final change be to the definition of temporary sign at the very last bit of substance in this ordinance in chapter 2190, to have a definition that reflects a small structure or wheels in such a way that allows for ready conveyance.
That's not a container.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I mean, Jackson puts wheels on it. On a hitch.
You know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
So I would entertain a motion to approve this sign code changes as highlighted by Mr. Getz.
So moved.
Second.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of you that spent this much time reviewing this. I was part of the group 8 or 10 years ago that spent 2 years, and it was a very arduous task, and it's hard. It's hard, and so I think it's a good first step, and we know things will evolve over time. So I thank you.
Okay, with that, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Nay. The resolution is approved. That moves us on to...
Mr. Chairman, I should have probably said this at the beginning. The reason I didn't say anything on this topic, obviously, I'm very passionate about it, but per the advice of the city attorney, I had recused myself. So.
Duly noted. Thank you. Item number 6, resolution recommending approval of ordinance amending section for off-street loading requirements.
This again will go to Justin.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This ordinance essentially arose out of a request from, not really a request, but just a point brought up by a business about, our restrictions when it comes to loading docks, and looking at ordinance, looking to see why exactly we have certain provisions in law. And let's see here. Let's see something. So 32. So it's just up. I'm sorry. We have the order a little bit askew on the, but that's all right. So business in an I-1 district came to us and was looking at, why we had certain ordinances the way that we did. And that got us to thinking internally, what is it about loading docks that are problematic? I mean, the potential for noise, the potential for aesthetic concerns to some extent. You're looking into the inner guts, if you will, of sometimes industrial, other times distribution operation. They can be loud. They also can implicate certain traffic concerns because you have vehicles pulling in, pulling out, oftentimes long vehicles, large vehicles. And so there is the potential there to cause issues, safety issues on the roads. All of these things are important concerns, but we couldn't quite square them, given these safety and aesthetic concerns, with sort of the broad brush painted in our current ordinance. So, as pointed out in the memo here, what this proposed ordinance revision does is it effectively allows loading docks to be located on street frontage in I-1 as well as I-2 zones, whereas now they can't be located on a street frontage and can, let me pull this up here, they cannot be located on a street frontage and can only be located, or it cannot be located in the street frontage and except in the I-2 zones. And so this would allow for I-1 and I-2 zones. The other provision we have in ordinances that they should be screened from view by various types of natural screening as well as fence and earthen screening. And the thought was that that should not be ubiquitous. Rather, if the loading facilities are facing sensitive zone districts like residential, that's where concerns about screening most come into play, because even with commercial zone districts, you still have the need for loading docks. So, I mean, if a commercial district is facing a loading dock, it doesn't appear like that would fundamentally impact a commercial district's operation, given that they generally need them as well.
These are only loading docks in I-1 or I-2 that we're talking about, though. We're not talking about loading docks in commercial areas, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct, Commissioner.
I want to clarify just a little bit for you that a loading dock and a big garage door are not the same. So you're allowed to currently put a big garage door. It's only if it's a loading dock that is prohibited.
In a C, in commercial district?
Classification in any place. Right now in the I-2, you're allowed to have a loading dock that faces the street, and we're just wanting to change that and make it allowable in the I-1 also. Most of our I-1 districts are onto themselves. We're still gonna require screening whenever it's adjacent to a residential.
Could we pull up a zoning map so we can see all the I-1 districts within the city? Can we we shut off everything but
So-
just the I-1, just the I-1 and the residential, just the I-1 districts to start with, maybe?
Yep. I'm just gonna remove them. I don't know if that was the right call, but
That's close, to start.
so light purple there is depicting all of the I-1 districts, mainly on the perimeters, as you can see. And then what other one did you want me to turn on?
No, I just wanted to get a feel for the I-1s first. Now turn on your residentials adjacent to those I-1s.
It's thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a big lift. Okay, so I think most of us would probably agree that, you know, the
We'll
biggest
change that
area where you
sometime.
could probably have conflict would be in the I-1 area, along that R2 area over there.
I think I'll just turn them all the same colors, so when it's residential against industrial.
Oh, okay. Well, just a quick comment. I mean, basically, most communities do have restrictions against berms and loading docks that front public streets, primarily from an aesthetic standpoint. That's the one of the main reasons. And those communities that do allow for berms and loading berths and docks to be constructed, they usually will then require that you have then a deeper frontage so that you can mitigate the impact of those loading docks and berths with a green space, so that's not right on top. And so again, we don't allow that in our C3, but we do have I-1 areas, adjacent to high traffic volume areas. And so thinking about what the previous comments regarding signs and the woman that was here before, it is an aesthetic appearance aspect for it. I mean, and that's one of the primary reasons that you see that. And so the question would be, I think, where's the impact? And the biggest impact is going to be in this part of town where you got residential structure, residential zoning adjacent to some of that I-1 usage. Just a comment.
One thing, Mr. Chairman, if I could. One thing in ordinance that we already have is with regard to plat approval of industrial zoned areas, the commission and staff are to consider the orientation of truck loading facilities, and I mean the concerns there can range from safety to aesthetics. I guess I would posit that the question is, does the commission feel confident in its ability to tailor these designs to these concerns, or should there be more of a ordinance prohibition there, maybe so that, I don't know, to give potential development a good roadmap?
Kenny, in the last 5 years, how many times has somebody approached you about wanting to put a loading dock or a berth facing 212 or 81 or 20? Or any major route? I mean, is this something that we get 1 a year, 10 a year?
On the major routes?
Yeah.
5 a year, maybe.
And how many of those 5 a year have subsequently been denied and they haven't done anything with it? Do they still come up with a berth or a loading dock to the facility?
Generally.
So
generally they were allowed to be there under other direction.
So they still find a way to make it work.
No,
They just,
No.
they just don't put one in then?
no, they put one in.
Facing, that's in conformance with the current ordinance, or?
No,
they're
that's what I'm
very-
saying.
So we're not enforcing it?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So what prompted this? Is there complaints that are coming in that we should be doing something?
Particularly this time it has come in, yeah, we have a property that plans on developing. They're actually in the business park, not the business park, but an I-1 district, you know, where the entire area is nothing but industrial. It's nothing but industrial businesses. And now to make them put a loading dock onto a side or rear is going to be a major expansion of all the paved and required paved area. And I'm not so sure that we want all that additional paved area if it's not required regardless, where they can just probably put it in the front. And the only thing that's going to be across the street is going to be another business or another commercial business or something like that. But now we've limited it. And our building time is always a factor here. I mean, taking something through the process is 4 or 5 weeks down the road. Do you get it or don't you get it? And like I said, in the past history of this, I could probably name 6, 7, 8 spots where it was allowed to happen anyway.
I kind of thought we had industrial zoning so they could put up
Yeah,
industry.
so we're not
and have
asking for
trucks
it in the
coming and
commercial,
going.
but we're asking for it in the industrial. And then whether it's happened in the commercial, I'm not saying it's happened in the commercial, but in the industrial, I'm saying it.
If we were to look at allowing it in these industrial areas that abut up against primarily residentially zoned property, we say that it needs to be, you know, aesthetically shielded. What's the standards gonna be for that?
It's going to be case by case basis to see where they want to put the door, see where it's going to be, and it's possibly, like you said, you're going to have a bigger setback to the front, and they're going to have to put some trees across the front or some kind of screen.
Do we need to give you those standards so that you have some ideas and parameters of what we're thinking?
It's so hard to outline every single situation what you might get.
Do we need bare minimums?
Well, if
Can you
out-
implement those standards while still allowing trucks easy access to a loading dock? I mean, are you going to make it so restrictive that, you know, the truck's going to have to make, you know,
I'm not going to
45
try
minutes
to. I don't know
get,
if you guys are or not.
That's my concern. You know, it's not easy to drive a semi and try to get it into a loading dock. Like what are you going to do? You know, you got loading docks right here across from, over by the post office.
Yeah,
And
and that's
school
written in
connection.
ordinance, and that's was
Yeah.
given to the long time ago. Special
Yeah.
consideration to allow that, yeah.
So,
But it's part of business in the industrial section. I mean, you got to give these guys some opportunity without saying, "Oh, you're going to spend another $50,000 to put a road to the backside, so I can hide that from another industrial business across the way."
I agree.
Agreed.
To your point, though, I wouldn't want to get into another situation today where you're allowing somebody to, you know,
Yeah.
park on the street to unload, right?
If we're talking about industrial zones, those lots are big enough that you shouldn't have that issue.
And they already got 40-foot setbacks, the minimum, so.
Right.
Our setbacks are substantially higher there.
Is any further discussion? Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Dowley. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Culhane, or a second by Mr. Culhane. Is there any further discussion of this proposal? Not all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no.
No.
No. And a roll call vote?
Stein?
No.
Dolly?
Yes.
Stonebarger?
No.
Olson?
Yes.
Colhane?
Yes.
Kays?
No.
So that,
Motion is rejected.
Oh, you took 6 votes, you only have 5 on the committee, don't you?
It's rejected.
Wait a minute.
There's three no votes, even if you got 2 no votes, you had rejected. You have to have 4 to approve.
Oh, wait.
So we do the roll call again?
Yeah, let's.
Yeah, let me get it. Let me actually tally. Okay, Stein.
No.
Dolly.
Yes.
Stonebarger.
No.
Olson.
Yes.
Culhane.
Yes.
Kays.
No.
So 3 to 3.
Motion
Motion
rejected.
fails.
Is there any old business?
Nope,
No.
it
Rejected. It failed. Is there any old business?
Nope, no old business.
Number 8, new business replat of New Life Edition in Midwest Evangelical
So-
Outlet.
Basically, what these new business items are is just keeping you guys in the loop of what can be done administratively. Just because this replat for the New Life Church, let me get to it first here. So they approached us, they want to plat this area here that is currently owned by the Methodist camp to put a sign. And because of what we talked extensively about the sign code and platting lots that are non-conforming for the usage of signage, we are directing them to replat the New Life Edition as it currently shows here, the boundaries, with the addition of that corner piece, just so then it is being done in conformance with all of the ordinance. The other option that they've done previously is they can describe this piece by legal description and then do a development lot agreement between the New Life Edition, tying that piece to that plat, which makes it conforming to where they could put a sign. We told them we would prefer if they would plat, but the development lot agreement, we let them know about that because it's been used previously.
And just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, for those that are newly serving, the terminology, the administrative plat is a plat that is entirely approved by Shane as a city engineer. The ordinance for that is 240702. And basically, he is authorized to administratively plat under SDCL 11-3-6 when there are only a few tweaks that need to be performed to what is already platted. Is the layman's summary.
And I wanted to be respectful of the sign process and not immediately open the door that would oppose what we just discussed at length. So that's why we're recommending a replat and actually tie those 2 pieces that they want to exchange into one parcel so that it's going to meet the size requirements. It's going to meet all the things. I didn't want to just parcel out, because what they originally asked us was just to plat that small triangle and allow them to build a sign on it. And I said, no, that's probably not what we want. So that's why we're giving them the direction that we are.
And the DeVillo Beach?
Yep, and then this, I'm zooming into it here. This is strictly just lot line adjustments to clean up properties. As you can see right now, there are 3 buildings on one lot, and it goes from this boundary here over to this boundary, where I'll pull up the new plat. Oh gosh, it's gonna make me. No, it's rotated 4 times. Okay, so the dash lines there you can see are the existing lot lines. The bold continuous lines are where they're making the adjustment. And all of the proprietors were part of the proprietor's certificate. They all signed off on it. It's just basically cleaning it up. And we just wanted to make you guys aware of that because that's something also that falls under the administrative plat approval. But just to keep you guys in the loop.
We are recommending one other thing. There is a storm sewer line that conveys water from Toby Slough into Lake Compesca, and we are going to ask that this document get modified to include an easement over that storm sewer so that the public maintains the right to inspect and access that storm sewer. So that, Brandy can point that out on the drawing. Well, you could see it on the drawing. Toby Slough. Go back to your original aerial.
Well, except that didn't show.
You can see,
because it says the ice.
I can see where the pipe is under the road. So between the white roofed building and the brown roofed building, right where her pointer is where that storm sewer goes through. So that's the only change to what we're seeing that we want to make sure we accommodate, and then this will be administratively approved.
We don't have any executive session, do we?
What's that?
We have no executive session, do we?
Nope.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Stein makes the motion. Mr. Dowley. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.